Hey guys, Bartel's Bookshelf here with my mid-ish October wrap-up. I've been getting quite a few books read for spooky season. As I said, I've just got a pile that I'm picking from throughout the month. But so far, I've got 5 books here to talk about. So let's get into it. The first thing I read was R.L. Stine's Fear Street, Truth or Dare. Of course, I mentioned this in my TBR video. This is a middle grade horror novel, obviously, that has a really interesting premise. So this is about a rich girl named Dara Harker, and these kids, some of them who know each other, some who are almost practically strangers, are invited to this rich girl's ski condo to stay for the weekend. They're all, excited about it, ready to ski and stuff. And then they get snowed in, and someone starts killing them off one by one. At least that's how it was sold on the back. And I was really interested in that because I love that sort of stuff. I love concepts like where people are snowed in, forced proximity, there's a killer on the loose. People have to figure out who it is. But to be honest, this was pretty disappointing. So it's called Truth or Dare because at one point early in the book, they play a game of Truth or Dare, and one of the characters gets upset when Dara, who's the snooty rich girl, ends up like revealing something about this guy and he gets like really offended, which leads to Dara being killed, and then they suspect that he's the killer. And then it's about kind of figuring out who the actual killer is and all that stuff. It was an interesting premise, but it didn't really go anywhere beyond that. The whole Truth or Dare premise is just explored for that one scene. I was led to believe that it would, because it says on the back here, a game they think will help them break the ice, who will tell the truth, who will take a dare, and how far will each of them go. So I was led to believe that it would be a kind of a slowly mounting tension kind of thing where it starts out fairly innocent and then the game gets darker and darker, and as people are dying around them, they start revealing darker things about each other's secrets and things like that. But it's not really that. It's more they just play one game of Truth or Dare, and then the rest of it is just a pretty inert slasher story. I read this at the beginning of the month and I've already forgotten some of it, but I think only like one character really dies. The rest of it is mostly just the characters sitting around drinking coffee and arguing with each other about who could be the killer, and it's honestly really boring. They don't really do anything with the Truth or Dare or the slasher concept. It kind of fails on both levels, which is a shame because it was a really interesting setup, and that 90s cover art is awesome. But yeah, honestly, it was just really disappointing. And I didn't like the reveal either. I won't spoil it in case you want to read this 90s YA paperback for yourself. But I thought the reveal of the killer and their motivations was really stupid and unsatisfying. There was kind of a fun climax, which the cover depicts, where they're stuck on a ski lift. But really, I just felt like most of just this whole book was kind of just a missed opportunity, and they didn't really do enough with it. They could have really gone into more detail, and they really didn't. It was just really disappointing, unfortunately. So yeah, not a great start to Spooky Month, but there you go. Next, I read Wolf Tracks by David Case. This was a 80s horror paperback that was reprinted by Valancourt recently. I did a full review of this, so I'll link that. I won't go into it again here. But yeah, this was even worse than Truth or Dare. This is probably the worst book I've read so far in October. It's just a very generic werewolf story with a police procedural / werewolf story where it's about the cops investigating a mysterious killer who turns out to be a werewolf, and every character in it is miserable, and there's just so much misogyny, and it's just aside from like all of just the offensiveness, it's just terribly written. It's loaded with typos. The dialogue is horrible. It's so bad. It's like, it's not even entertaining bad. It's just inept in every single way. Unfortunately, this is the worst book I've read so far for October, and really didn't bode well for the rest of the books I've been reading this month, unfortunately. But if you want to know more about that, I'll link to my review. Then next I read the second book in the Lockwood & Co. series by Jonathan Stroud. This is The Whispering Skull. I talked a little bit about the third book in this series, which I bought recently on my latest haul video. But Laura and Nakia are really big fans of this series. This is a British YA series that takes place in an alternate London, where they're dealing with what they call the problem, which is ghosts and spirits sort of coming back from the dead and haunting places. And it's been going on for about 50 years. And so the culture of England has kind of built up around this the the business of ghost hunting. There's entire agencies that employ children to hunt and eliminate or basically exorcise ghosts, because children and teenagers are the only ones capable of interacting with ghosts psychically, physically, that kind of thing. The series at large deals with the eponymous Lockwood and Company, which is a three-person company run by Anthony Lockwood, who's this sort of well-to-do orphan who has like a mysterious background. There's Lucy Carlisle, who's a young girl who's in the first book is new to the company. And then there's George Cubbins, who's sort of a portly, nerdy type, who's like their research assistant. He does all of the digging through archives to kind of find out the backstories of the ghosts so that they can hopefully figure out how to exorcise them and things like that. I started this last year and I wasn't in the right headspace for it, so I didn't finish it. But I decided this year to read it again for Spooky Month, and I really, really enjoyed it the second time around. I won't go into any of the plot details since it is a sequel and I don't want to spoil anything. But the Whispering Skull is a very prominent plot point. It's a skull in a jar that talks to Lucy, which in the world of Lockwood and Co. is like a big deal. It's considered a type 3, which is a ghost with like full sentience that's able to like converse with people, and they're immensely rare. It's rumored that whether they even exist or not. And so this skull ends up conversing with Lucy, and they end up sort of investigating it, and through that it ends up kind of inadvertently helping them through the case they're investigating in this book. And much like the first book, this was a lot of fun. One thing that I really like about it is that Jonathan Stroud has just that very dry British sense of humor. It's very, very, very sarcastic, very, very witty. It's a lot of fun to read, but it's also not just like, kids being snarky. It's a really interesting world. There's a lot of really cool world building. The way that they sort of categorize the ghosts and sort of the investigations and things are all really interesting. And one thing that really surprised me about this book and the first book is that there's a lot of really tense, spooky sequences, because this is basically it's sort of an action horror novel for kids, and I think it does really well on both counts in terms of the action and the horror. There's a really tense sequence where they have to escape from an auction house full of these like haunted objects. There's another sequence in the book where they're investigating this big manor house, and they end up confronting this ghost that's sort of haunting the building. And I don't want to spoil him because he's really, really cool. It's really imaginative. There's a lot of sad moments where they talk about kind of the nature of life and death, and the ghosts are malevolent a lot of the time, but there's also like a sadness to them that the author explores really, really well. And I really, really enjoyed that. There's just a lot about it that it's just a lot of fun, perfect for the Halloween season. I was talking with Laura and Nakia about it, and I said it has that kind of vibe of like Casper, like the 90s Casper movie, or like Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, where like it's lighthearted and silly, but there's also like a little bit of darkness and a little bit of scariness, and you know what I mean? It's that balance of like fun and horror. It just feels very Halloween-y. Very very dark and mischievous and witty and interesting. So yeah, I'm really excited to continue reading this series. As I said in my haul video, I have the third book, so I don't know if I'll get to that in October, but I do want to get to that at some point. I really enjoyed this. This is definitely the best book I've read so far in October. So yeah, and this is being turned into a series also on Netflix, I think either this year or next year. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that turns out, and I know Laura and Nakia are as well. So yeah, that was the Whispering Skull. Highly recommended. Next, I have Star Trek Demons by J.M. Dillard. This is number 30 in the Pocketbook series. Again, talked about this in my TBR video. Again, I was sold about this based on the concept. The Enterprise picks up some Vulcan archaeologists who are investigating these ruins on this old planet. It was called like Beekman's Planet or something like that. That made me think of Beekman's World. Does anybody remember Beekman's World? But anyway, it's a place called Beekman's Planet, and they find these old artifacts there that are almost like these pearlescent, like clamshell-looking things. And they have these beings inside of them that basically like infect people and drive them violently insane. They kind of like possess them basically, and the demons, as it were, basically go around possessing people and making them go crazy. And so Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and this woman, she's a young ensign, a telepath named Anitra, basically have to investigate these mysterious happenings and figure out how to stop it. And I thought that was a great premise. That was a really good idea. I know that that's quite frequent in Star Trek, where like, some alien force invades the ship and everyone starts acting crazy. There was the Naked Time in the original Star Trek and stuff like that. But I was really intrigued by this because it was taking, as I sort of hinted at, it was taking sort of more of a demonic, almost like elder god like vibe to it, because it's implied that these creatures are incredibly old, and they laid waste to the previous world that they were taken from. And one of the other interesting things is that it takes place primarily on Vulcan, which is a really interesting contrast because, Vulcans are usually so calm and reserved and cool and collected. But then you get to see the entirety of Vulcan basically get infected by these creatures and just go absolutely nuts. That was all really, really intriguing, and I was really looking forward to it. And unfortunately, it was very disappointing. So I looked into J.M. Dillard, and I found out it's a pseudonym of Jean Kalogridis, who wrote the Covenant of the Vampire series, which I have but haven't read. But she has a background in horror fiction. And so for someone who has a background in horror fiction, this really isn't all that scary. It kind of just feels like a really lame episode of the original series. There's not really any moments of tension or suspense. They don't really lean into like the horror of any of it all, which is really sad because, like, again, it's sort of marketed as like a more horrific angle of Star Trek. And Star Trek has always had an element of horror to it, whether it's like the Salt Vampire or the Night Terrors episode of TNG. Like, there's always been this like sort of subtle horror element to a lot of Star Trek that I was really hoping this would pick up on, but it's really just kind of limp and boring. The whole appeal of the book that I said about seeing Vulcan kind of go insane and crazy isn't really followed up on. There's no real detail given about any of the violence or destruction that's going on. You just kind of have the characters in the book just kind of walking through the city, like, and nobody's like panicking. There's no mention of like any chaos or violence or anything. Like, they meet characters who say stuff like, "Oh, people are going crazy," but we don't see any of it. They don't show any of it. It's just lip service, and we just really spend most of the time with the characters just kind of wandering around the Vulcan desert as they're trying to like develop to like figure out a cure and stuff. There was some interesting stuff with Amanda and Spock's mother and Sarek, Spock's father, getting infected. There's some like fun moments where Sarek goes a little bit crazy that are kind of cool. But like for the most part, it was just very limp and boring, and there was no real sense of like tension or atmosphere or anything. I was just really disappointed by it. Also, the resolution to the whole issue of the infection is resolved really stupidly, I thought. Like, it's just such a horrible Deus Ex Machina where they cover up the ridiculousness of it with technobabble, but it's just not believable at all. And it just feels too easily resolved for what's supposed to be this huge issue, this huge planet-wide issue. Oh, and there's this really lame romance between McCoy and Anitra that just comes out of nowhere. And the author keeps trying to make us like, she keeps trying to make it like a thing where it's like, part of the suspense comes out of, will they be able to see each other, because they love each other, but they could die or they could get possessed. Like, she tries to like wring suspense out of that, but it's just so trite and unbelievable. And like, it's like insta love basically. And it's just not developed in any meaningful way. There was just so much about it that was so disappointing, which really sucks because I love Star Trek and I love horror. And I was really looking forward to this, but unfortunately it didn't measure up, sadly. And unfortunately, I'm not really looking forward to a Bloodthirst now because that's also a J.M. Dillard novel. And I think that one's related to this one, at least from what I read, from what I could gather from what I read. It's related to this one. So I'm really not looking forward to that, but I mean, we'll see. This had so much potential, and it just squandered it. And it's like, how do you squander a premise that great? We'll see if any of the other horror adjacent entries of Star Trek that I've gathered are any good. I really hope so, because as I said, Star Trek has always had a big horror element to it, so I would like to see more of that, but this wasn't it, unfortunately. Then finally, for this mid-October wrap-up, I have The Dark Cry of the Moon by Charles L. Grant. Obviously, I had to get one more werewolf novel in there. I've got plenty. And this one was really, really short, 184 pages, and I'd had it sitting on my shelf for ages. And I mean, that cover is just perfect for Halloween, isn't it? Larry Talbot, werewolf, big full moon there. How could you go wrong? Well, once again, this was really disappointing. So this is set in Charles L. Grant's fictional town of Oxrun Station, which he's written about in a series of novels. I didn't realize until afterward, but this is actually the second part of a loose trilogy that takes place back in the past of Oxrun Station, and each novel deals with kind of like classic horror monsters. This one deals with werewolves, but there's another one that deals with mummies and another one that deals with vampires. So this takes place in Oxrun Station, and I think it's post-war, so like late 1860s, 1870s. They don't specify, but they talk about the war and stuff like that. And it focuses on who else? The chief of police, who's this big burly guy named Lucas. And these mysterious murders start happening. And of course, they're all wondering who it can be. But of course, we all know that it's a werewolf. Honestly, this was a lot like Wolf Tracks in the sense that it was just a very generic werewolf story. You know, I mean, we've all heard that premise so many times, you know, where it's like a police procedural where there's these mysterious murders happening in a town, and the characters are trying to figure out who could do it because the wounds are not quite animal and not quite man. And they spend like 2/3 of the novel trying to figure out what it is, even though we know it's a fucking werewolf because look at the fucking cover. Really, like, the werewolf in this story is just interchangeable. It could have been a vampire. It could have been a mummy. It could have been anything. The fact that it's a werewolf like means nothing to the narrative. And aside from that, it's just really boring. It's not as badly written as Wolf Tracks. I will say this is much more competently written. There's actually some really nice turns of phrase. And I know Charles L. Grant was respected as he had a pretty storied career as a writer and editor. But man, this just didn't do it for me. This was just generic as generic comes. Everyone's like a stock character. You know, you've got the manly police chief, you've got the town drunk, you've got, you know, the injured war vet, you've got the crazy old man, and of course you've got the mysterious foreign old woman who knows all the secrets and reveals everything to the main character. I think what it was trying to go for was sort of a classic Universal Monsters, like horror kind of vibe, and I'm okay with that if it's done well. But it just didn't add anything to it. Like, it had nothing new to say. The characters and the dialogue weren't interesting enough to be worth telling. It was just so generic, you know, good guy, bad guy stuff. As I said, the werewolf is like totally interchangeable. It could have been any kind of monster. It had you know, you could have swapped it out with anything and it wouldn't have made any difference. I don't really even have much to say about it just because it was so dull. And it sucks because, like, as I said, like, Charles L. Grant has a pretty storied history as a writer and editor. He edited the Whispers anthology series and stuff like that. I mean, he's got a reputation. But based on this, I'm really not that impressed. But I don't know, maybe I just got the wrong book. I don't know. But yeah, as a werewolf fan, this was just generic as generic comes. It wasn't that interesting. And I figured out who the werewolf was within like 50 pages of the book. And the whole reveal of the werewolf I thought was really just poorly done and just not that interesting. The whole like motivation of the werewolf. There was one moment where I thought it would get kind of interesting where the police chief gets attacked by the werewolf, and I thought at first he was going to get bitten, and then it would explore him becoming a werewolf, and then he would have to, like, you know, try to figure out how to stop the curse. That would have been really interesting, but no, that doesn't happen. But then they throw in this like lame twist at the end where it's implied like one of the characters did get bitten by the werewolf, but it doesn't matter because I don't care about the story or any of the characters, so what do I care about this, you know, lame ass, you know, dun 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 ending, you know? So yeah, unfortunately, just another one that was just really disappointing, and it sucks because that seems to have been kind of the common theme of all of my October reading. Aside from Lockwood and Co., all of my October reads so far this month have just been really disappointing, and unfortunately it's just been really disheartening for me, which sucks because I really wanted to like get into the Halloween spirit and really enjoy myself and just really get into like spooky season, but like so far everything has just been limp and disappointing. I'm almost like hesitant to pick up another book from my TBR pile now because it's like everything has been disappointing except for one book. Kind of a down note to end this mid-month wrap-up on, but I have to be honest, you know, I've just been picking up books as they come to my interest. You know, it's all luck of the draw, and unfortunately I haven't been very lucky this month so far. Fingers crossed that I'll find something later on in the month that will just really blow me away or that I'll just really enjoy. We'll see, but based on my current track record, I'm not holding out hope. But I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you guys have any suggestions for some spooky reads for me to check out, some Halloween reads, let me know. And yeah, let me know what you thought of this video. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. And until I see you guys next time, happy Halloween!